For years, people across the United States speculated whether or not suspected bomber Eric Rudolph was alive or dead. But all those doubts were laid to rest in late May of 2003 when he finally reappeared. Rudolph's case was complicated, but little by little, he shared with investigators how he had survived on his own for so long and his clandestine plans to put more people, including members of the federal task force searching for him, in harm's way once again. He also put his thoughts on paper, giving everyone a first-hand look on the thought process behind his violent crimes. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas.
They are the families of the missing in America, and they're desperately searching for answers.
Somebody knows something.
I'm Josh Mankiewicz. Join me for Season 3 of Missing in America. Listen carefully, because just one small detail might allow you to solve a mystery.
We have seen miracles happen.
Dateline, Missing in America. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Episode 108, The Capture of Eric Rudolph, Part 2. Last week we discussed how North Carolina resident Eric Rudolph became a suspect in several bombings in Georgia and Alabama. He went into hiding in the western North Carolina mountains before he could be questioned, resulting in a 5-year-long manhunt. If you haven't listened to Part 1, I encourage you to do that before checking out this week's episode. Around 4 a.m. on May 31st, 2003, 21-year-old rookie police officer Jeff Postel was making a second run patrolling the area behind the Valley Village shopping center in the town of Murphy, which at the time had under 2,000 residents, when he noticed a man ducking behind some milk crates at the Save-A-Lot. Postel took a closer look because he thought he had interrupted a burglary in progress. When he noticed the man had a black object in his hand, Postel called for backup in case the item in question turned out to be a weapon. At the scene, Matthews asked him if he was in fact Rudolph. The man said no, that his name was Jerry Wilson, and he gave them a date of birth and address that turned out to be false. Once they were at the station, and the suspicious man was ensconced in the holding cell, officers noticed a scar on his chin and other marks that identified him as Rudolph. They went back and forth looking at the images circulated by the FBI and comparing them to the man in the cell. They pressed him again, until he finally admitted that he was in fact Eric Rudolph. Fingerprinting the suspect confirmed his identity, and he said, "I'm Eric Rudolph, and you got me." They soon discovered a campsite of Rudolph's nearby on the east side of Will Scott Mountain near Murphy High School. A footpath near the high school led to Valley River, which was very close to the Valley Village shopping center where Rudolph was discovered. It was also close to the home of former Cherokee County Sheriff Jack Thompson, who joked that Rudolph had probably been eating out of his garden. Law enforcement noted that Rudolph was probably foraging for food in the dumpsters behind the shopping center when he was caught. Officer Sean Postel, who was only 16 years old when Rudolph first went on the run, became an instant local celebrity. People magazine even made him one of the 25 hottest bachelors of 2003. He had only been on the job for 10 months, but took his responsibilities seriously. He later explained that he always switched up his patrol route so there would be no trend anyone could follow. Years later, he told the Gaston Gazette that he was annoyed when people would say he got lucky when he busted Rudolph. "I think the arrest of Eric Rudolph has nothing to do with luck. It was being vigilant. It was being responsible, being in the field, on the job, doing what people expected me to do, what people hired me to do." Immediately following Rudolph's arrest, curious visitors flocked to the small community of Murphy, hoping to get a glimpse of the fugitive as he was taken from the courthouse. Some even wore commemorative T-shirts that read, "Eric Rudolph was caught in Murphy, North Carolina, and I was there." They lingered around the small downtown area and had their pictures taken near the dumpster behind the Save-A-Lot. A nearby coffee shop renamed drinks on their menu to offer the Caught Ya Coffee, Eric Espresso, and captured Cappuccino. Onlookers weren't the only ones who set up camp. Journalists from media outlets across the country arrived first in Murphy and then went into Asheville, where Rudolph was expected to be arraigned. His capture was covered everywhere from the local newspapers and television stations to the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, CNN, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and MSNBC, to name a few. On June 2, 2003, authorities announced Rudolph would be tried first in Birmingham, Alabama. Prosecutors believed the case was stronger there and that they could seek the death penalty because the bombing resulted in the death of Robert Sanderson, the police officer working security at the New Woman All-Women Clinic. Rudolph made his initial court appearance in Asheville and then was flown to Birmingham. The Northern Alabama U.S. Attorney announced she would seek the death penalty against Rudolph. A defense attorney named Richard Jaffe was first assigned to the case before withdrawing. William Bowen took over then, telling the media that his client was a real gentleman. The public has a real misconception about who Eric Rudolph is, and he will tell his story when the time is right, his attorney said. After his arrest, Rudolph showed investigators 2 different campsites about 7 miles apart using a topographical map. One was just outside of Murphy, and the other was in Clay County. He said he survived by killing 22 wild turkeys, an 8-point deer, and a bear with a rifle he had taken with him. When they checked out the Clay County campsite, they found that he had buried wheeled trash cans, as well as strung them from the trees above so that bears couldn't get to the food he'd stashed inside. He had apparently been taking these trash cans from the neighboring communities and wheeling them up the mountain. They found tarps, a small tent, and a patio made out of 18-inch rocks. They also found evidence he had been visiting the nearby Taco Bell in Murphy, possibly dumpster diving, because investigators found collectible cups that had been issued in 2002, along with wrappers from the restaurant. During the years that Rudolph was evading capture, members of the media received conflicting opinions on local residents' feelings about the fugitive. A lot of the population in western North Carolina at the time considered themselves to be pro-life, so they could see his motives behind bombing the abortion clinics. Some people outright said they wouldn't have turned Rudolph away if he'd asked them for help during his time on the run. But an article that ran in the June 8, 2003 edition of the Charlotte Observer took a deeper look at the local sentiment surrounding Rudolph. It was titled, "This is not a hotbed of conspiracy. Rural residents admired Eric Rudolph for his elusiveness, not his viewpoints." The mayor of Murphy at the time, Bill Hughes, defended the local residents when approached by reporters after Rudolph's capture. He said they never condoned what Rudolph was accused of and never gave him safe harbor. A professor from Davidson College spent time in western North Carolina in 2000 while she researched the Rudolph case. She explained that she didn't find anyone stating they were sympathetic to the bombings, but he was seen as a hero for his ability to elude the authorities who spent so much time searching for him. One local even said, "He was considered like Robin Hood around here. Most people kind of marveled at the fact that they sent all these agents around, and he outsmarted them." At the time, Mark Potok, a spokesperson for the Southern Poverty Law Center, said he had come across what he called a broad sympathy for Rudolph. Potok said, "I don't think that necessarily means these people support the murder of a police officer or bombing of an abortion clinic, but there was a romance in this. He was seen as a Butch Cassidy character. He braved the elements, defied the dogs, fled the censors and hundreds of FBI agents, and for 5 years got out clean." In an opinion piece that ran in the June 8, 2003 edition of the Asheville Citizen-Times, a writer named John Armour explained some of the history behind the mountainous area Rudolph hid out in for so long. It was the same place where Native Americans fled after President Andrew Jackson ordered they be marched to what would later become Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. Armour described how they were able to stay hidden in the mountains for many years, surviving on the land, before later establishing themselves as the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Confederate soldiers also hid out in the same area after the Civil War ended in 1865, some for more than 20 years, before they finally felt like it was safe to come out of the woods. Armour explained that both of these groups did not have help from local citizens. Instead, they relied on the topography and geography of the hills to keep them safe. In the Nantahala Gorge, there are many limestone caverns and mines that Rudolph likely used for shelter over the years. During the course of their research on Rudolph, authorities discovered he and his family had been connected to a group called North Point Tactical Teams. In 1972, a man named Nord Davis, once an executive with IBM, settled in Macon County and began sharing his racist and anti-Semitic views with others. He set up a compound on 200 acres and amassed a following of about 200 followers who received paramilitary training alongside Davis's philosophies. Rudolph's mother, Patricia, had allegedly moved her family to the area in the early 1980s to be closer to Davis's movement and North Point tactical teams. Davis passed away in 1997. A former FBI executive, Chris Swecker, headed the Charlotte office when Rudolph was arrested. He shared that he believed Rudolph hadn't had any outside help during his years on the run because he was a loner and wouldn't have trusted anyone. He said that Rudolph had stored 55-gallon barrels in the ground that were filled with grain, soy, and oats. He would visit a nearby granary at night and fill a backpack with supplies bit by bit. He knew when vegetables would be put out on the loading docks at local restaurants, and he would forage there when he could. Swecker also believed Rudolph would spend time in cabins in the mountains when they were unoccupied, and he would scout them out ahead of time. This could explain how he had a neatly trimmed mustache and haircut when he was caught. Swecker said Rudolph had an air of defeat about him when he was arrested, and that he almost seemed relieved. He had tears in his eyes as he was getting on the plane to Atlanta, and Swecker believes he was emotional because he realized he would probably never see the mountains again. Police officer Sean Postel said Rudolph had the coldest eyes he'd ever seen, and that he believed Rudolph wanted to intimidate him when they crossed paths again in the federal courthouse in Birmingham. Rudolph's trial in Birmingham was scheduled to begin jury selection on April 6, 2005. Just 3 days later, Rudolph agreed to plead guilty to the bombings in order to avoid the possibility of receiving the death penalty. As part of the agreement, where he would receive multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, he told them of 250 pounds of secret stashes of explosives he had hidden in North Carolina. One bomb was found on a hill near a National Guard armory in Murphy. Rudolph had planned to set it off when members of the task force were searching for him in 2001, but had apparently changed his mind. Bombs and bomb-making materials were found in at least 5 different areas, 3 of them populated. Authorities believe the dynamite was stolen from a rock quarry near Cherokee. A federal defense attorney named Judy Clark was assigned to Rudolph's case by an Alabama judge. She helped broker the deal for him to plead guilty. At the time, she worked for the Federal Defender's Office in San Diego, California, and was known for her staunch views against the death penalty. She had represented both the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski and Susan Smith from South Carolina, assisting with plea agreements that kept them off death row. Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Do you love true crime and travel? Having traveled the world solo the last couple of years and being obsessed with true crime, I found myself researching others who took the same vacations but never made it home. The Last Trip is a true crime podcast covering missing and murdered people that were living their best lives on vacation. I'm your host, Jamie Beebe, and each week I'll bring you on The Last Trip, taking a deep dive into vacation culture and travel spots, tips on staying alive while traveling, and ultimately recreating someone's last days in paradise. What led to their last trip? What are the hard facts? What is the final outcome? And could you be next? David Snedden was a 24-year-old college student from Utah attending Mandarin classes in Beijing when he mysteriously disappeared while hiking Tiger Leaping Gorge. Chinese authorities said he drowned in the gorge, and U.S. authorities agreed, although his body was never found and his parents didn't believe that. 7 years later, out of the blue, they got a phone call from a former U.S. official who had evidence David is still alive. This case sounds like a Hollywood movie, but evidence doesn't lie. So where is David Snedden? Famous rugby player and Celebrity X Factor contestant Levi Davis went missing in Barcelona last year while on a backpacking trip through Europe. Just days before he vanished, he posted a 15-minute video to his Instagram account saying his life was in danger and people were after him. After he disappeared, several theories emerged. But what really happened to Levi Davis? Join me, Jamie Beebe, co-host of the popular true crime series Strictly Stalking, as I embark on a brand new adventure combining true crime and travel. Listen to The Last Trip wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you looking to level up your writing or learn a new skill? Whether you focus on nonfiction or are more inclined to creative writing, or want to learn how to put together a digital portfolio of your writing, Wow Women on Writing can help. Interested in podcasting? Check out a digital course I created called You Can Start a Podcast. During this pre-recorded webinar, you will learn the benefits of creating your own podcast, materials you need to get started, how to develop content that will keep listeners coming back for more, and ways your podcast can create supplemental income. I'll share examples of different types of podcasts, how to decide on a format, ways to handle the technology necessary for creating a podcast, how to develop your first few episodes, promotion and monetization ideas, and ways you can repurpose your podcast content. I'll provide all the written materials and resources you need, along with a handout with information discussed in the webinar. I'll also give you suggestions for a few different types of podcasts to explore to get started. Best of all, this webinar only costs $30. You can find it by going to wow-womenonwriting.com and clicking on the Classroom tab. I'll post a link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. Survivors of the bombings had mixed reactions to the plea deal. Emily Lyons, the nurse who received life-threatening injuries during the Birmingham clinic bombing, said she was disappointed, but understood the necessity of the deal to potentially save lives from other bombs and acts of violence from Rudolph. Her husband said the benefit of the deal was that Rudolph would have to admit guilt, dismissing the arguments that he had been framed. Alice Hawthorne's husband also said he wasn't thrilled with the decision, but if it came in exchange for certain information, we could support it. If other people end up killed or seriously injured, I didn't want that on my conscience, holding out for the death penalty. He said he couldn't speak for his late wife, but believed she would have supported the decision as well. Rudolph was ordered to pay more than $1 million in restitution to his victims. As part of this plea agreement, he agreed to answer questions posed to him by the federal government about his cases. He waived his right to appeal his conviction and sentence. Rudolph presented authorities with an 11-page typewritten statement where he offered a motive for his attacks in the Southeast. He shared his original plan was to force the cancellation of the Olympic Games, or at least empty the area around the venues and disrupt the flow of visitors and money the Games were bringing into the city. What he had wanted was to plant 5 bombs over several different days, but poor planning on his part made this plan impossible to carry out. He felt remorseful when the blast from the bomb killed an innocent bystander, but said what he really wanted was to kill members of law enforcement. That was why he had tried to tip them off with the 911 call about 30 to 45 minutes before the bomb went off. He had planned to do the same thing with the 4 other bombs, call in a tip beforehand so only law enforcement responding to the threats would be harmed. He wrote, "I am not an anarchist. I have nothing against government or law enforcement in general. It is solely for the reason this government has legalized the murder of children that I have no allegiance to, nor do I recognize the legitimacy of this particular government in Washington." He explained, "The Republican Party is the modern equivalent to the Pharisaical sect in ancient Judea. You are like whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Even so, you outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within you are full of hypocrisy and inequity." Matthew 23:28. The coward Bush talks about the culture of life, but intends to effect no change with respect to Roe v. Wade. He made this perfectly clear when he stated during the stem cell debate that America is not ready to abolish Roe v. Wade. On the matter of homosexuality, he shared, "Practiced by consenting adults within the confines of their own private lives, homosexuality is not a threat to society. Those consenting adults practicing this behavior in privacy should not be hassled by a society which respects the sanctity of private sexual life. But when the attempt is made to drag this practice out of the closet and into the public square, every effort should be made, including force if necessary, to halt this effort." When discussing the attack on the Other Side Lounge, he said, "Like the assault at the abortion mill, 2 devices used. The first device was designed not necessarily to target the patrons of this homosexual bar, but rather to set the stage for the next device, which was again targeted at Washington's agents. The attack itself was meant to send a powerful message in protest of Washington's continued tolerance and support for the homosexual political agenda." He talked about how he had planned to strike the FBI agents who were set up in Andrews during the summer of 1999, but after spending most of that summer gathering food, he was not able to put together the necessary equipment to carry through with his plan. He planned another attack in the fall of 2000, but ultimately decided not to carry that one out. He said, "The next 3 years were spent living in a fairly comfortable routine, which involved mostly hunting and camp life. After so many years ducking and hiding and eating crappy foods, you tend to let your guard down, and this is what led to my capture in Murphy in 2003. It has been a long journey up to this point, but I still have a ways to go." In April 2005, the News and Observer shared information about the person instrumental in identifying Eric Rudolph as a suspect in the bombing at the abortion clinic in Birmingham. Jermaine Hughes was a 20-year-old student at the University of Alabama at Birmingham doing laundry around 7:30 in the morning when he heard a loud boom. He could see the clinic from the ground floor window of the laundry room and was struck by an odd image, a man walking quickly away from the scene while others were running towards the clinic. He actually went out and got into his car to follow the man, who he saw get into a Nissan truck and appeared to be taking off a disguise. Hughes followed the truck for a few blocks but eventually lost sight of him, stopping at a fast food restaurant to place a call to the police with a description. While there, he saw the truck again and told another nearby witness, Jeff Tickle, a local attorney. The two men got into their separate cars and attempted to follow the suspicious man. It was Tickle who wrote down the license plate of Eric Rudolph's truck. Jermaine Hughes graduated from college in June of 2000 and then went on to attend law school. Authorities protected his identity for years because they were worried someone might try to harm him while Rudolph was in hiding and then awaiting trial. A lot of people wondered if Jean Postel was eligible to receive the $1 million reward for finding Rudolph, and while the mayor of Murphy pushed for him to receive it, he never did. He said he would have donated it if he had received it because he felt like he was just doing his job when the arrest happened. Postel later moved up north and worked with the Boston College Police Department, and then served a few terms on the local city council there. In 2005, Henry Schuster and Charles Stone published the book Hunting Eric Rudolph, an Insider's Account of the 5-year search for the Olympic bombing suspect. Schuster had worked as a producer for CNN, and Stone was the head of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Anti-Terrorist Unit. While incarcerated in a federal prison in Colorado, Rudolph has not stayed quiet. In 2013, with the help of his brother Daniel, Eric Rudolph self-published a 394-page memoir titled Between the Lines of Drift, The Memoirs of a Militant. The U.S. government immediately seized $200 in sales from the book, as he still owed $1 million in restitution to his victims, and money from the book was earmarked for that fund. He filed a request to keep the money from his autobiography, and a judge in Alabama quickly denied the request for a hearing, saying Rudolph gave up money from any publications in his plea agreement. In June of 2020, Rudolph filed an 11-page appellate motion to vacate 2 of his life sentences, saying they were in violation of the Constitution and in excess of the maximum allowed by law. 3 judges from the 11th Circuit panel vacated his motion in July of 2021, stating, Eric Rudolph is bound by the terms of his own bargain. He negotiated to spare his life, and in return he waived the right to collaterally attack his sentences in any post-conviction proceedings. We will not disrupt that agreement. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Like what you hear? You can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, Wow Women on Writing, and the great programs and writing contests they have to support writers at wow-womenonwriting.com. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. Sound editing is provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.